afternoon, Dr. Lily. Okay. So I think we shall start. It's already 3 o'clock with 64 participants currently. So I think we shall start first. All right. Very good afternoon to all our members here. I would like to welcome all of you all to our Malaysian Mycology Interest Group, CME, for the month of August 2022. All right, with the title of Treatment of Invasive Candidiasis, and particularly is antifungal resistant a cause for concern? Yeah. So this will be presented by our Dr. Lau Li, who's an infectious disease physician in Hospital Sultanah Bahiyah, Alor, Kedah. So before I pass the floor to her, let me just introduce her to all of you all. Okay, she's an infectious disease physician since March 2011, and she is also a chief coordinator of State Infectious Control and AMS Committee since 2019. And she's also chief coordinator of AMS Committee of Hospital Sultanah Bahiyah since 2014. She obtained her MD from UKM in 2000 and persuaded her postgraduate qualification. She has been she obtained MRCP UK 2006. So otherwise, she holds other positions as well, where I think I need to address here. There are few. She's a committee member of Asia Fungal Working Group, AFWG, under International Society for Human and Animal Mycology, head of Infectious Diseases for State of Kedah, Penang Family Health Development Association, member of Malaysian Society of HIV Medicine, member of Malaysian Society of Infectious Disease and Chemotherapy, member of Malaysian Society of Infectious Control and Infectious Diseases, MYICID. She involved in tremendous work as a working committee and also committee member, naming few: Malaysian Consensus Guideline of Antiretroviral Therapy, National Antimicrobial Guideline 2019, Clinical Guideline on COVID-19 vaccination in Malaysia. And also to mention here, she has a tremendous work, a research experience, which I don't think I can coin out each one of it. There are a lot of it, and also a lot of publications. Yeah. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Lau Li for our CME today. So the floor is yours, Dr. Lau. Please continue.
Thank you, Dr. Mala. So just allow me to share my slides. Can everyone see my screen now?
Okay, I can. How about the rest? I think if you have any problem, maybe the rest can comment in the chat box. We can look into it. For me, I can see the slide.
All right, I think it's quite a delay, so I'll just kickstart. So my name is Lily. Thanks to the chairperson for the very kind introductions. So I'm from Kedah, from the Hijau Kuning state. Yeah. So this topic, I shall deliver a talk on the treatment of invasive candidiasis, in particular looking at the questions here: is antifungal resistance a cause of concern? So first and foremost, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Fairuz, Dr. Muni, and the IMR team for the courtesy to allow me to share some of the data that's been done by the IMR. And not to forget my microbiology unit for my hospital, and I have nothing to declare. So the aim of my talk today is to address the 4 questions that I have highlighted here. What is the most prevalent Candida species causing invasive candidiasis? And how common is Azole or echinocandin-resistant Candida species, and therefore which antifungal agent to use, and also MIC in relation to clinical practice. So where invasive candidiasis is coming from? So we know that Candida is a commensal in human being. We can find the Candida on our skin or overlying the mucosal surfaces. So for example, if there is a cannulations or infilling catheter when there is a breach of skin integrity, there's a possibility that the Candida might progress into the invasive disease. Likewise, possibility that it might translocate from the gut. So the incidence of invasive candidiasis I will share later. But the commonest organism that related invasive candidiasis are C. albicans, C. gravata, C. parapsilosis, tropicalis, and Cushai. Okay, even though we know that Candida albicans is the commonest Candida species associated with invasive disease, but recently there's a paradigm shift to non-albicans Candida species. And for example, in UK, gravata has been regarded as the second commonest Candida infection associated with the invasive candidiasis. So in terms of incidence of candidemia, this is the data compiled by IMR, 3.08 per 100,000 populations, okay, from the year 2018 to 2020. And in UK, the incidence was around 3.3, and whereas it was higher in US, around 7 cases per 100,000. As a whole, the candidemia incidence is around 3 to 5 per 100,000 population globally. So antifungal susceptibility for clinical isolates, be it from the blood or non-blood specimen from 2018 to 2020. So there was around 1,000 isolates that been subjected for the susceptibility testing from around 40 hospitals and institutions. So the analysis was conducted using the FULNet software, and the MIC was determined based on the CLSI breakpoints using the 3 methods I mentioned here. So the limitations of this study is that the study method of the MIC is not standardized. Nevertheless, I think this is great work that done MR is really a meaningful and useful data that I think I should share here. So this is data of the commonest Candida species in Malaysia. Okay, back in 2018 and 2019, Candida tropicalis was the commonest Candida species associated that have been isolated from our among the 40 hospitals that subjected the isolates. Okay, but in 2020, you can see the bar chart here. The commonest is albicans, followed by the tropicalis, then gravata, and parapsilosis. And thankfully, Candida Cushai is not very common. Only 3 isolates were identified in year 2020. So as for treatment option, this is sort of like our guide, a simple guide or our Bible. So fluconazole is the first-line treatment for a lot of infections that caused by the common Candida species, for example, C. albicans, tropicalis, and parapsilosis, whereas echinocandin is considered to be the first-line treatment for gravata and Cushai. But is it always true? So Candida albicans is the commonest Candida species, and usually is one of the Candida species that's sensitive to most of the antifungal agents that are available to us. But however, azole-resistant Candida albicans strain has been found in animals. Likewise, azole-resistant Candida albicans has been reported among the patients who were being given or exposed to multiple courses of azole therapy. For example, in HIV patients, so when they have recurrent oropharyngeal candidiasis, they will prescribe courses over courses for azole treatment. And likewise, women with vaginitis, they will given multiple cycles of azole treatment. Therefore, subsequently, they develop azole-resistant Candida albicans. As a whole, in US, the rates of fluconazole-resistant Candida albicans were pretty much very low, 0.2 to 2%. So these are our local data. So if we look at the resistance rate, only 5.3% resistant to fluconazole, but there was as high as 11% that resistant to voriconazole. And the susceptibility towards annular fungin and micafungin very good, but not the case for caspofungin. But I would like to highlight here the susceptibility test is based on CLSI based breakpoints, whereas in UCAS, they didn't put up the breakpoints for caspofungin, as caspofungin has been found to be unreliable for the MIC determination due to high inter-laboratory variability. So we move on to the azole-resistant in non-albicans Candida. So acquired resistant, azole-resistant can be seen, in fact, in any form of Candida species. This is due to the mutations coded by the ERG11 genes, and resulting in the reduced drug-to-antigen, drug-to-target affinity or over-expressions of the efflux pump. So, and when the Candida acquire the fluconazole resistant, they are becoming more virulent. Okay, So azole resistant rate in US are increasing over the years. And I think I need to mention here the emergence of C. auris exhibit as high as 93% resistant towards fluconazole. So Candida tropicalis is one of the commonest in our country, in our regions here. Is usually susceptible to all antifungal agents, including the fluconazole, icoconazole, but unfortunately, it is becoming more common as azole resistant C. tropicalis. Okay, it's against due to the overexpressions of the gene. And for instance, in Iran, patients that been infected with fluconazole resistant isolates did not actually receive fluconazole 90 days prior to the manifestations of the candidemia. And likewise in Taiwan and Japan, 50% of the fluconazole resistant C. tropicalis were actually azole naive. This is a bit peculiar for Candida tropicalis, whereas in other Candida species, when they develop azole resistant, usually when they track back their history of exposure to azole. So in Taiwan, when they conducted the study of this Candida resistant in the environment, they found that fluconazole resistant C. tropicalis was actually isolated from the fruits. This is believed is due to the cross resistance because the antifungal were used as a fungicide in the farming. So again, this is our local data. So as high as 16% of our Candida tropicalis are resistant to fluconazole. This is not good, it's quite alarming and quite worrying. And of course, it remains sensitive towards Anidula and also Mica fungi. And this is my, again, is my local data. It's quite consistent with the national data, whereby over the years, we're seeing that the resistant rates towards azole are increasing. So next, we're moving on to C. parapsilosis complex. Actually, this consists of three distinct species. They are the C. parapsilosis, C. autopsilosis, and metapsilosis. Until we know more about the subspecies, so these three subspecies are grouped under the heading of C. parapsilosis complex, and they are using this one single same MIC breakpoints. Okay, and C. parapsilosis usually they're sensitive to azole. Okay, intrinsically they have higher echinocandin MIC due to the presence of the AKS1 gene, but this doesn't mean that they always resistant to echinocandin. Okay, so however, azole resistant C. parapsilosis have becoming more common worldwide. In fact, sometimes associated with the nosocomial outbreak. Okay, so usually the emergence of azole resistant C. parapsilosis is found to be associated with prolonged usage of antifungal, more so in the situations whereby the antifungal agent was given in a suboptimal dosage with inadequate source control. So this again is our local data. So our C. parapsilosis, 11% have resistant to fluconazole, but thankfully 100% still sensitive to voriconazole. Okay, on the other hand, the sensitivity towards the echinocandin is quite variable, but I think we need to work out the data, right? So this is my local data from Bahiyah. Again, it's quite similar with the national data. The resistant patterns towards azole is increasing over the years. Now, the big question marks here. Can we use echinocandin to treat infections that is caused by C. parapsilosis complex? Of course, we know that our preferred first choice of treatment is still fluconazole, but there will be some instances whereby fluconazole is contraindicated, for example, resistant, or patients has transaminitis, whereby we could the usage of fluconazole as a first-line treatment, and more so if it's challenging if patient had renal failure at the same time, we can't use amphotericin B. So as a matter of fact, no clinical study that have demonstrated superiority of the fluconazole over the echinocandin for treatment of C. parapsilosis infections. And data from clinical trials have indicated that echinocandins have actually good effectiveness in the treatment for parapsilosis infections. For example, I just quoting a paper that a study that done in Spain, whereby it shows that the initial use of echinocandin-based regime does not seem to have untoward impact on the clinical treatment outcome for C. parapsilosis bloodstream infections. So this is a paper published in 2017 looking at the efficacy of Anidula fungin in patients with invasive candidiasis a patient's level pool analysis of 6 clinical trials. So in this study, we can see that when you use a antifungal in the treatment of infections caused by C. parapsilosis, the global response success rate was around 77.5%, and this is quite on par with the response rates when the infection is due to other Candida species. Okay, and the same group of researchers have then narrowed down and just focused on Candida parapsilosis. So when you look at parapsilosis, there was around 70% that had candidemia due to this C. parapsilosis, and the all-cause mortality was only 5.7% by day 14, 14% by day 28. And the overall microbiological response success rate was as good as 89.1% at the end of intravenous therapy and 81.2% at the end of therapy. So in this study, patient was given IV antifungal, and when patient's condition is stable, is allowed to convert to oral antifungal agents. Therefore, they put the endpoint as end of intravenous therapy. So they concluded that IV antifungal was effective for the treatment of C. parapsilosis candidemia. So in this study, again, the sensitivity of the C. parapsilosis towards antifungal was 86.2%. So, however, there are also case reports shows that breakthrough parapsilosis infections among the hematological patients that were put on echinocandin as prophylaxis, and this is mainly due to heteroresistance, whereby in a big colony of the C. parapsilosis, there are probably a few yeast cells that are actually resistant to the echinocandin. So when the echinocandin is able to kill off all the sensitive yeast cells, leaving behind the resistant strain, and this resistant strain is giving rise to the breakthrough. So there are also reports of the breakthrough C. parapsilosis fungemia during echinocandin treatment for the prior C. gravata fungemia infections. Okay, and univariate analysis shows that echinocandin is the least effective treatment for the infections that due to C. parapsilosis. However, there is no difference in terms of the mortality. So again, a 5-year retrospective review of all candidemia that was done in the US. Okay, it shows that when there's increased use of caspofungin usage, that is represented by the gray bar here. At the same time, there's also increased incidence of C. parapsilosis. That is the black line here. Okay, so C. tropicalis and C. gravata reduced because these agents are expected to be sensitive to caspofungin. So when comparing the caspofungin and amphotericin B as a treatment for invasive candidiasis, so you look at the C. parapsilosis, in terms of treatment failure, the treatment failure rates higher when in a group of patients that have been given caspofungin as compared to amphotericin B, but this is only small, very small observation study. There is no statistics confirmations. And this study comparing micafungin and liposomal ampho-B as a treatment of invasive candidiasis. When you look at the number of patients with a mycological persistent or failure, again is higher in a group of patients that given micafungin compared to those patients that given amphotericin B. The next study is comparing antifungal and fluconazole. So we look at parapsilosis. Okay, the success rate is better if let's say patient given fluconazole as a treatment as compared to antifungal. So even either is in the mycological response or global response rates. Okay, so what can we conclude here? I think the jury is still out. Can we use echinocandin to treat infections that are caused by C. parapsilosis? I would say that my first choice is still azole for for the infections that are caused by C. parapsilosis. But in the event that the azole is not possible, of course, I will look at the possibility of using amphotericin B. And you can still use echinocandin, but you must always watch out for the possibility of breakthrough infections due to the high MIC. Now, we move on to C. gravata. Okay, this is one of the species that has reduced susceptibility to azole due to overexpression of the efflux pump. And the previous azole use actually is one of the risk factors contributed to the azole resistance, and it potentially may cause that healthcare associated acquired fluconazole resistant C. gravata. This is a study done by the Italian group. If you just look at the susceptibility pattern of the C. gravata towards fluconazole, only about 25% of the C. gravata actually sensitive to fluconazole, whereas as high as or as good as 95% of the C. gravata sensitive to voriconazole. On the right-hand side, this is the C. cruzi. 100% of the cruzi sensitive to voriconazole. So echinocandin resistant in C. gravata. Okay, again, okay, breakthrough C. gravata infections has been reported among the patients that was given micafungin as prophylaxis or as a form of treatment because of the infections due to C. gravata. And most of the time in these instances is due to inadequate source control. For example, patient has got the leaking anastomosis. Okay, and in Switzerland, echinocandin resistant C. gravata actually was observed among the patients that was given echinocandin treatment for more than 15 days. This is a paper by Alexander. When they look, the researchers are looking at the C. gravata bloodstream infections, okay, and the resistance to echinocandin and also fluconazole were increasing steadily over the study period from 2001 till 2021. And 80% of the patients infected with the FKS mutants demonstrated intermediate or resistant MIC towards echinocandin. So it shows that FKS probably responsible for the high MIC. And this is a global surveillance to look at the azole resistance among the C. gravata. Okay, and we could see here the global resistance rates toward azole is around 6.1%. Okay, and this is Asia Pacific country, 2.7%, and this is 5.9%, and this is the highest among the North American, 8.1%. There's only 2.1% of the isolate that cross resistant to echinocandin, and only 2 isolates that cross resistant between the fluconazole and also echinocandin. So back to our local data about the C. gravata susceptibility patterns. Okay, 5.5% resistant to fluconazole. This is quite a good rate as compared to Italy, whereby there are 25 in Italy, only 25% sensitive to fluconazole. Okay, again, it maintains good susceptibility towards imidulafungin and micafungin. So SDD meaning the susceptibility dose dependent. So if let's say the susceptibility pattern is fall under SDD, you still can consider to use fluconazole as an option of treatment, but provided you use high dose, okay, not the standard dose of 16 mg per kg per day. Now, this is a C. gravata in China. I think the resistance rate is quite consistent with what we see from the data that's shared by IMR. 4.3% of the C. gravata actually considered as fluconazole resistant, 11.6% are cross-resistant to fluconazole and voriconazole, and most of the isolate are considered susceptible to echinocandins. Okay, in short, C. gravata might be resistant to echinocandin, but the percentage is very low. Okay, less than 3%, and only a handful of the C. gravata that already developed resistance towards fluconazole based on the data that we see here and also in China. So C. cruzi, and everyone is quite familiar with C. cruzi. It is a Candida species that are intrinsically resistant to fluconazole. Okay, but in most situations, it remains sensitive towards voriconazole. Okay, and breakthrough C. cruzi infections has been reported among neutropenic patients that have been given fluconazole as prophylaxis. Now, Candida auris, I think is not complete if by giving a Candida talk. I do not mention about C. auris because this is the focus of attentions right now. C. auris was first described in Japan, okay, but however, retrospectively, when you look back, actually C. auris has been identified back in 1996 in South Korea. Okay, and this C. auris closely related to 3 other species, namely the Hemorrhoini complex, pseudohemoluni, and also Lusitania. Okay, and what is peculiar, what is worrying us about C. auris is able to live or remain viable on the abiotic surfaces, for example, the beds, in the sink, in the medical devices. So this is the map showing the timeline from the time that C. auris was discovered, 2009, up to 2018. There were already about 600 plus cases C. auris being identified in various countries in India and Africa, in the US, in the European country, and in Malaysia. I think there was already 2 cases that been reported in 2018. So the 3 salient point about Candida auris, it is usually resistant to multiple classes of antifungal agents, okay, and potentially it can be misdiagnosed as other yeasts by the commonly available commercial identifications method, for example, YTAC. Sometimes it's been identified as C. hemoloni or C. faumata, okay, and is able to colonize patients and also on the hospital environment. Therefore, potentially it might be coming an outbreak. And true enough that there are case reports mentions about the outbreak secondary to Candida auris in ICU. Okay, in United States, about 90% of the C. auris isolate have resistant to fluconazole, 30% resistant to amphotericin B, and thankfully remain sensitive to echinocandin. So this is the breakpoints that suggested by CDC. It's called tentative breakpoints because we have not had a very good defined breakpoints by CLSI or the UCAS group. So this is the breakpoint, tentative breakpoints that suggested by CDC, just as a guidance. And in summary, okay, in Candida species where when it harbors a high MIC, it predicts the presence of mutation genes. Okay, and the mutation genes actually associated with reduced susceptibility towards the specific antifungal agents. For example, FKS mutation is a predictor of a clinical treatment response towards echinocandin. Okay, nevertheless, these are all only in vitro results. It doesn't mean that in the specimen or in the patients that infected by a Candida species that harbor FKS is definitely is resistant to the echinocandins. Okay, but we must always correct the in vitro result with the in vivo outcome. Okay, now I would like to mention here, even the FKS mutants confer higher MIC towards echinocandin, but Candida species that actually carry the FKS mutant, they are less fit, reduced fitness. They are slower in growing and have a thicker cell wall. In layman terms, probably you can mention that it's a bit like hypothyroid, very slow growing. The Candida species not fit in growing, is very slow, meaning it's a bit lemah. Okay, in a way, even though they have a high MIC, but potentially if you have good source control, the adequate treatment, you may be able to eradicate the infections with the standard treatment. Okay, that brings us into these 90 and 60 row. In this row, it mentions that infections due to susceptible isolate usually will respond to the appropriate treatment in 90% of the time. Okay, it's not 100%, yeah, because there are other factors that contribute to the treatment success. Whereas infections due to resistant isolates, 60% you may still able to get over the infection if you given the inappropriate treatment. Okay, why is it so? Okay, so when you're dealing with the candidiasis or invasive candidiasis, yes, we need to know the organism that contributed to the infections, and it's good to know the MIC, which will help us to decide which will be the antifungal agents that we think that have higher chances to contribute or to overcome the infections. But don't forget that there are other important elements that may determine the treatment success. For example, is it the right diagnosis? And if you're dealing with the immunocompromised host, you have to reverse the immunocompromised stage as far as possible. For example, if the patient is on steroid, you probably have to reduce the steroid dose as far as possible. And the burden of the disease or the fungal infections at the site of infections, So if patient has got an indwelling catheter, as far as possible, we would like the catheter to be removed. Or if patient has got a big seated collections of abscess, we would like the abscess to be drained. Okay, and also PKPD. It's very important to make sure that there is no drug-drug interaction when we initiate antifungal therapy, and also the dose that we prescribe to the patient actually is a correct dose according to the size, according to the kidney, liver functions, and the general conditions of the patients. And side infections, for example, you need to know that which antifungals that are able to penetrate to the brain, to the eye, and also to the urine. And the length of treatment and also compliance to treatment is equally important. So what I would like to stress here, MIC and also the gene and is not the ultimate point that determines the success of treatment. We also need to look at other elements here. So the emergence of resistance is the next challenge. Yeah. So we should only consider antifungal prophylaxis in patients with high risk of develop the fungal infections, mostly among the hematological group neutropenia. Okay, and if we initiate the patient antifungal therapy, we must always remember to repeat the blood cultures 48 to 72 hours to look for culture appearance. And whenever is possible, we try to remove the catheter as soon as possible, because by merely removing the catheter, you're able to overcome the infections and or increase the survival rates. Okay, and we also can consider to convert intravenous therapy to oral therapy when patient is stable. Okay, I think that's the end of my slide. This is my last slide. So I'm happy to take any questions. Over to you, Dr. Mala.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lo Lily. That was a very, very informative presentation, I would say. All right. In the Q&A sections, we have two questions. The first one is from Dr. Hanis Razwani. The question goes like this. What is your opinion for use of amphotericin B as empirical treatment for candidemia infection, doctor?
All right. So I think there is no straightforward answers here. Before you know that which antifungal that you should use for empirical treatment, and first and foremost, you need to know your hospital antibiogram. As I mentioned or I shared earlier, I know that in my hospital, the commonest candida species that associated with infection is either albicans or tropicalis, almost 50%. And I do know that these two species is usually sensitive to amphotericin B. So in these situations, yes, amphotericin B could be the one of the choice of the antifungal agent in terms of the as empirical treatment. But bearing in mind that amphotericin B, here we are talking about conventional or deoxycholate amphotericin B, so we have to worry about the toxic side effect. So in the event that you do not have access to more expensive antifungal agent, for example, ecandins, okay, yes, amphotericin B could be one of the choice that provided that you have to monitor the side effect, the renal functions carefully. Okay, and of course, before you consider amphotericin B, fluconazole will be one of the options. If you're only considering dealing with the albicans or tropicalis in the patients that never been exposed to azole before.
Right. So I hope that answers Dr. Hanis Razwani's question. So we go to the next question, Doctor. We have this question from Dr. YR. Right. From your experience, do you use flucytosine to treat candida, and in what type of infection? Thank you.
Okay. Now, flucytosine I did not mention. So you notice I did not mention in my slides. As traditionally, there's not much of data or case reports that they're mentioned using flucytosine as treatment in candida, and more so flucytosine is never, we never use a flucytosine as monotherapy. Okay, usually it's an adjunct therapy or add on to the backbone of the other antifungal agents. But from the in vitro data, most of the time, other than Candida cruzi, most of the other species are usually susceptible to K. cruzi. To flucytosine. Okay, I think they shared if I think we have microbiologists at the ground here. If I'm not mistaken, for flucytosine, there's only one breakpoint, general breakpoint for all Candida species. Okay, so most of the time, all the candida are sensitive towards flu cytosine except Gaucher. So I can't comment further because really there's a very scanty data on the flu cytosine to be used as a treatment for candida infections. But if we talk about flu cytosines, the properties of the drug, it has got very good penetration to the brain, to the eye, to the UV. So traditionally in the past, when people do not have access to echinocandins or just all the new antifungal agents, so when you're facing with the patients whereby we have difficult infections that in the sexually side, in the brain, in the eye, in the urine, you may consider want to add on flucytosine, but I have to mention here is probably will be off-label because we do not have much data to support our practice here.
Right, thank you, Doctor. So we go to the third question. Right, if we change a new catheter on the background of Candida fungemia and the new line is still having growth of Candida, do we need to remove the line?
That is a very practical question. I think we see that we're facing that situation from time to time. So yes, as I mentioned here, we should remove catheter as far as possible. And usually when we remove the catheter, what we do is we tend to have a catheter-free period before we insert the new line. Okay, so that we're hoping that we will achieve the clearance from the blood before we insert a new line. So I do know that sometimes in certain situations it's not possible to have catheter-free period as the patient probably not stable or patient do not have a granular access. In that situation, yes, if you have if you reinserted a new catheter and unfortunately the new catheter be infected again, yes, eventually we still have to remove the catheter because that potentially will be the source of infections and the formations of biofilm.
Right, hope that answers the question. All right, we have another question. Okay, the questions keep coming. All right, so the next is by Dr. Muhammad Zaki. If Candida auris tested sensitive to azole and echinocandin in vitro, can we assume it is sensitive or still consider it as resistant when choosing the treatment, doctor?
When you're talking about the auris, I suppose that when you decide the sensitive or resistant, it's probably based on the tentative breakpoints. So this probably will be questions that more appropriate if we forward it to microbiologists. So I suppose that if it's a mentioned sensitive echinocandin, you can still use the echinocandin because this is a first-line treatment. Okay, but as a whole, we still have to monitor it carefully for the clinical response.
Right. Okay, another question from Dr. Hani Shazwani. This is also a question from me as well. I can ask you this also. Based on your experience dealing with patient, dealing with cryptococcus infection, how long the cryptococcal antigen will be tested positive? Yes, please, doctor.
This is a bit out of the scope. Yeah, today we are talking about the Candida. All right. So maybe Mala, you can share your experience. Now, I think we have to look in when you're talking about the cryptococcal infections. So we have to look into whether this is the immunocompromised host, HIV infected or non-HIV. So traditionally, we know that in patients that with HIV positive, we don't actually bother to monitor the cryptococcal antigen because that will remain positive for a long period of time. As compared in contrast with the non-HIV patient, usually the cryptococcal antigen will disappear within a period of time. As we started treatment, we expect the antigen should become, the titer become lower and probably disappear. Okay, so Mala, what would you say?
Yes, I'm here. Right. So, yes, the cryptococcal antigen, apparently when I was working in Hospital Sungai Buloh, they actually do send. And I would say that whenever they send is positive. So they will look into the titration as well, the dilution, to see whether the response, whether it's coming down the titration and all. But most of the time that I see, it will be positive. It's like once it's positive, just the dilution is the differs. Yeah, so I myself not sure when it will become actually the real negative. Yeah. So yes, so we'll go to the question session again. Okay, I think that's all from the participant. Is there any more question from the participants? If not, can I ask you more question, Doctor?
Sure, Mala.
Right. So pertaining to our topic today, the resistance of it, right? So I have 3 questions with me. So number 1, what will be your choice of empirical antifungal agent in a patient suspected to have invasive candidiasis, Doctor?
All right, thanks, Mala. Yeah, that's probably very close to the questions, the first questions. If I'm given a choice, of course, I wouldn't use amphotericin B. Okay, so if we follow the international guideline, be it the the European guideline or the CRSI, that's by the US group, all mentions that the first line treatment should be echinocandin, because the study has shown that comparing N-agulafungin and fluconazole, N-agulafungin is far more superior when compared with fluconazole. So, but in practice, we know that not all of us have the luxury to have the access to the echinocandins. It's rather costly. So if you can, echinocandins, but in the situations whereby your patient is not too septic, not too ill, okay, and patients, more importantly, this patient has not been exposed to azole treatment in the past, you may still use fluconazole, okay, and monitor closely till the sensitivity of the identifications of the candemia came through. Okay, so echinocandin first choice for very ill patients, but you may still consider fluconazole for the very practical reason.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Fluconazole. Yeah. Right. My second burning question. Right. What is the most important aspect in the treatment of candidiasis, Doctor?
In the treatment of candidiasis, I think the most important, of course, I think to get access to the very expensive antifungal. Okay, so I think this is one of the challenges that we are facing, any one of us. Okay, so now the other aspect that important, of course, is to identify the Candida species down to the species level. Okay, we know that every species has got the different susceptibility patterns, and of course, we get to know the MIC. That will be wonderful. I think that will be great help to the clinicians. And the next step, I think important point is to continue with the surveillance study. So like the data that contributed MR, I think is very meaningful and helpful. It gives us a overview of the recent patterns in Malaysia. Now we know that we have to be very cautious if we're dealing with the infections caused by C. tropicalis. Okay, you know that it might be resistant to azole, and we know that our Candida mostly will be Candida gravidae mostly will be still sensitive to azole. So this is the usefulness of the surveillance of the data, give us some informations.
Right, Doctor. Can I ask you a last question from me? And we have another 2 more questions in the question Q&A sections. Okay. The last question from me. The way forward, how could we improve our candida management armamentarium?
Yeah, I think will be the same. We need to make sure we can get access to the most expensive of the newest antifungal agents available. Okay, so liposomal amphotericin B, echinocandins, and etc. Of course, we need to have a very good lab support to make sure that our turnaround time to identify the Candida species is fast, including the use of the biomarkers, for example, beta-glucan.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. Okay, can we go to the Q&A section? This is a question from Dr. Leslie. Okay, my ex-lecturer in UPM. Yeah, right. So his question goes like this. Thank you, Dr. Low. Are you worried with the Candida tropicalis increasing trend of resistance? If yes, what study do you wish to be conducted in our country with regards to it?
Wow, thanks, Leslie. So I suppose that based on my questions, Leslie will probably draw out a proposal to carry out the study. That is good point. Now, yes, I'm worried. In my practice, I do came across that patients that never been exposed to azole, yet when they're sick, when they did the blood culture, it came out to be C. tropicalis, which is resistant to azole. Okay, so we can't predict what is the risk factors that trigger the resistance, perhaps it will be good we can conduct a study to show that which are the risk factors that may contribute towards the emergence of azole-resistant tree tropicalis. Taiwan has conducted a study, but they found that actually the gene actually is available in the environment associated with the fungicide used in farm, but we do not know actually what's happening in Malaysia.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Loh. I think a new proposal coming up soon by Dr. Leslie. Right. We go to the last question from an anonymous. Oh no, before that, we have another question too. All right. From anonymous, we have this question: which echinocandin will be for treatment of choice for candidemia, Doctor?
That is a very difficult question. And I think I already put up that disclaimer that I have no conflict in interest. I'm not tied with any of the pharmaceutical company. As a whole, the three echinocandins are quite similar, I would say, in terms of efficacy. Okay, so there is none. I don't think there will be any head-to-head comparison trial to compare one echinocandins over the other. I don't think anyone in the right mind will do that. So as a whole, the efficacy was quite similar. So how we choose the choice of anti-echinocandins, putting aside the very practical reason, the cost, then the others factors we look into, of course, is whether patient has got any liver problem. We try to avoid CASPO if, let's say, patient has got very severe liver functions, okay, and drug-drug interactions, okay. Otherwise, I think they are pretty much similar in terms of the PK/PD. All of the echinocandins do not penetrate into the eye, do not penetrate into the brain, it's not excreted in the urine. They are quite similar. So I can't decide, one is better or superior over the other. So it depends on which one you have is available in your pharmacy.
Right. So no COI, another, no conflict of interest, right? So there's another last question from Sazali Basri. Oh, sorry, help me here. What is your take on use or misuse of serum BDG? Do you use an algorithm for its use? And what is your cutoff for number 1, intra-app infection, number 2, shock in ICU, but not from II? All right.
Hi, Hemi. I think that it will be a very simple question answer from me. We do not have access to beta-glucan yet. So actually, we do not have clinical experience. We are still waiting for the beta-glucan validations before we can go out to be used in the government hospital.
Right, that seems to be a straightforward answer from you, Doctor. So yeah, so I think that's all in the Q&A session. Are there any more questions from the floor? You can write in the Q&A session. Meanwhile, the rest can fill up the Google attendance sheet that I already shared in the chat box. So any last words of wisdom from you, Doctor, for us?
I think thank you for staying up with us. It's a Thursday afternoon and some of you already off duty 3:30. So hope get some useful information, okay, about Candida species and invasive candidiasis. So we still wait for the next MMIG. So stay tuned with MMIG.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Loh. We really appreciate your presentation and your input today. We really learned a lot. And Q&A session, I think there's one more. Can we give chance to the last one? Oh, sorry. Can please share again, Anthony? Sure. So otherwise, I think it was a very great sharing, I would say. Thank you very much to all the attendants. We have about 116 attendees for now. We'll share again the attendance list in the chat box. Yeah. So yeah, stay tuned for a while. I'll just share it again. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Loh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.